September 1941. The Battle of the Atlantic was reaching a critical point. The skies over the Atlantic Ocean were darkened by the shadow of German U-boats, their sleek submarines prowling beneath the waves, silently hunting their prey. For the Allied forces, this was the most dangerous aspect of their war effort. The U-boats had already sunk countless merchant ships, cutting off vital supplies to Britain and the rest of Europe. The success of the Nazi regime depended on this campaign, as the submarine warfare threatened to starve the Allies into submission. The Allied response, though fierce, was fragmented. Convoys of ships, grouped together for protection, were often scattered and uncoordinated, making them easy targets for the U-boats' deadly torpedoes. The German submarines had a simple yet effective tactic: find the convoys, attack when they were most vulnerable, and disappear before any counterattack could be mounted. The constant losses were devastating. Supplies were dwindling, and Britain's ability to maintain its war effort was hanging by a thread. If nothing was done to curb the U-boat attacks, it seemed that the Axis might achieve an undeniable victory in the Atlantic. The Allies needed a solution, one that was bold, innovative, and seemingly impossible. Enter the mind of an engineer, a man whose idea would change the course of the war. His name was Captain William T. May, an officer in the British Royal Navy, and he had been studying the problem of submarine warfare with one question in mind: how could the Allies stop losing ships to the U-boats? Captain William T. May, along with a handful of other engineers and naval strategists, began formulating a plan that seemed far-fetched at the time. His idea was simple yet radical. Instead of dispersing merchant ships across the Atlantic to sail individually, they would travel in tightly organized groups, or convoys, escorted by warships. The convoy would act as a mobile fortress, making it far more difficult for U-boats to target individual vessels. At first, the idea was met with skepticism and resistance. Many in the British Navy, including high-ranking officers, dismissed it as impractical. The U-boat menace seemed insurmountable, and the thought of escorting dozens of merchant ships with warships seemed inefficient and resource-draining. There were doubts about whether enough escorts could be mustered to protect every convoy, and some argued that the enemy would simply find new ways to break through these formations. Others feared that this idea would drain critical naval resources that were already stretched thin by the ongoing war effort. Yet, despite the doubts, May persisted. He understood that the current strategy was failing. The U-boats were too fast, too deadly, and too effective at picking off lone merchant ships. A new approach was needed, one that would make it much more difficult for the submarines to launch successful attacks. After months of planning, the first trial convoy system was put into place in 1941. It wasn't perfect, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter in the Battle of the Atlantic. Instead of relying on isolated ships, large convoys of merchant vessels, now escorted by warships, began crossing the Atlantic. The convoy system turned the odds in the Allies' favor. The protective warships, equipped with depth charges and armed with trained crews, could actively hunt and destroy U-boats that attempted to break through the convoy's defenses. The U-boat crews, accustomed to the ease of picking off lone targets, now faced a far more difficult challenge. The convoy system was not a perfect solution, but it drastically altered the dynamic of the battle. German submariners, who had once struck fear into the hearts of Allied merchant sailors, now found themselves at a disadvantage. By 1942, the convoy system was becoming a formidable force. The first major convoy operation, designated PQ-17, provided crucial data on how well the system could work in real combat conditions. However, the success of the convoy system was not immediate, and early operations were still dangerous. The Germans quickly adapted to the presence of the convoys, and U-boats began using new tactics to penetrate the formations. Yet, despite these efforts, the Allies began to see a significant reduction in the number of ships lost to German submarines. The German U-boats, which had once enjoyed near free reign over the Atlantic, now faced a more complex battlefield. They were no longer able to pick off lone ships one by one, and their attacks were less effective against the tightly protected convoys. The warships escorting the convoys, destroyers, corvettes, and even aircraft, acted as a deterrent, forcing the U-boats to dive deeper and remain submerged for longer periods, reducing their effectiveness in attack. Depth charges and sonar technology became crucial weapons in the fight, as the Allied escort vessels could now detect and destroy the submarines hiding beneath the waves. The convoy system also brought about a shift in the balance of power. For the first time, the Allies had a method of mitigating the U-boat threat. This was not to say the U-boats were defeated, but rather that the Allies had figured out how to reduce their devastating impact. While German submarines were still dangerous and deadly, they no longer had the freedom to operate without constraint. The shift in strategy meant that the Allies could send convoys in greater numbers, safely transporting supplies across the Atlantic without fear of being picked off by lurking U-boats. As the months went by, the U-boat crews grew more frustrated. The once easy task of hunting isolated merchant ships became an increasingly difficult one, as Allied escorts continually thwarted their attacks. The German submariners found it harder to target merchant ships without being detected, and their patrol routes became more dangerous. The loss of experienced U-boat commanders further depleted the effectiveness of their operations, as many were killed in increasingly desperate encounters with Allied forces. The U-boats, which had once been the dominant weapon in the Battle of the Atlantic, began to suffer. The convoy system disrupted their ability to destroy the critical supply lines between North America and Europe. This change was not just tactical, it was a psychological blow to the German Navy. The battle for control of the Atlantic, which had seemed so dire for the Allies, was now shifting. By late 1943, the convoy system had become the backbone of the Allied strategy in the Battle of the Atlantic. The implementation of long-range aircraft, new radar technology, and increased anti-submarine warfare tactics made it increasingly difficult for German U-boats to operate with the same effectiveness as they had in the early years of the war. As the Allies grew stronger, so did their ability to protect critical supply lines. The U-boat offensive, once the cornerstone of the German naval strategy, was slowly being neutralized. One of the key turning points in the battle came during the Battle of the Atlantic in the summer of 1943. U-boat losses had been steadily increasing as the Allies adapted to the threat. In the face of mounting casualties and a lack of success, the German Navy began to withdraw its U-boats from the Atlantic. The Allies, buoyed by the success of their convoy system, pushed forward with even greater confidence. The change was palpable. Once the convoy system was fully operational, Allied merchant ships began to traverse the Atlantic with fewer losses. German U-boats, which had once posed a serious existential threat to the Allied war effort, were now on the defensive. Allied convoys, protected by warships, aircraft, and better tactical coordination, faced far fewer attacks. The long-term consequences of Captain William T. May's seemingly impossible idea were profound. His innovation not only saved countless lives and protected vital supplies, but also shifted the momentum of the war in the Allies' favor. The German Navy, whose submarines had once roamed the Atlantic with near impunity, found themselves locked in a desperate struggle to counter the convoy system. But by the time they adapted, it was too late. The Allies had already gained the upper hand. The convoy system became a cornerstone of the Allied victory, not just in the Battle of the Atlantic, but in the war as a whole. It ensured that vital supplies, troops, and equipment were able to reach Britain, fueling the Allied war machine and preparing for the eventual invasion of Normandy in 1944. Without these critical supply lines, the Allied forces would have been severely crippled in their efforts to defeat the Axis powers. Captain May's idea, once dismissed as impossible, saved the lives of thousands of soldiers and sailors, and it became one of the key factors that helped the Allies win the war. In a broader sense, it demonstrated the power of innovation and the importance of thinking beyond traditional military strategies. What had been seen as an unfeasible plan had, against all odds, turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic, securing victory for the Allies in one of the most crucial theaters of World War II.